Hi, this is Nancy Mills on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Lane County. I'd like to welcome you to this presentation that will provide additional information on the 4 state ballot measures and 10 local ballot measures that you will make choices about in the upcoming election. While this will provide some information, there are additional sources of information about the election that you would be interested in. So let me start my slides and let's take a look at what some of those are. So on this first slide, I have the website for the League of Women Voters in Lane County. At that website, you can find recordings that candidates for office have made at different candidate forums. You can also find information at Vote 411. So if you go to vote411.org or use this handy QR code that you'll only see for a couple more seconds, you can find out information about how to register, whether you're registered, what are the issues on the ballot, basically the one-stop shopping for voter information. There is also a voter's guide that is put out by the League of Women Voters of Oregon, and that is available in print form in a variety of places, but you can also find it in digital form on your computer at the League of Women Voters of Oregon website. So consider all of these sources of information. And I should say that one of the real benefits, I think, about our ability to vote by mail is that when we are in the process of making decisions, we can stop and get information about the measures or the candidates that are on the ballot so that we can make informed choices. And that really is one of the goals of the League of Women Voters. We have 2 goals. The first is voter education. The second is advocacy. When we do voter education, we do not describe the League's position on any of the issues. We provide both sides of the argument and enough information so that you can make an educated choice for yourself about the outcome that fits your understanding of the situation. So with that, let's talk about the first ballot measure. So this is ballot measure 111, which comes to the ballot, comes to the election as a referral from the legislature, which means that the legislature designed this measure and is asking the voters to weigh in on it. It amends the Constitution. So that is a particular, that's a higher bar than legislation is, because it's harder to change the Constitution. So what does this say? It says that the state must ensure affordable healthcare access balanced against the requirement to fund schools and essential services. Now, I'm not going to read these slides to you, but what I will do is give you a moment to take a look at the second paragraph that starts with, "It is the obligation of the state." So what do supporters say about this bill? What they say are things like gaps in healthcare leave some people uninsured, that insurance is sometimes unaffordable, that the lack of affordable care hurts finances, prevents people from going to work or school. A delay in care because a lack of insurance can result in larger medical bills. Oftentimes in this area, people say things that seem reasonable, but without any sort of backing. In this case, these statements are supported by research, including an article in the Journal of Pediatrics that was published in 2009. What do opponents say? Opponents say that the state is promising healthcare it can't deliver, that government-controlled healthcare would degrade the quality of healthcare by limiting choices and making patients wait, and that government-controlled healthcare is unfeasible. So where do the concerns come from? The concerns come in part because of the cost, the anticipated cost of providing health care, and the fact that this is balanced against the public interest in funding public schools and other essential services. Basically, this might come from the general fund, and so we need to worry about those sorts of choices. Now, to get a sense of what this might mean, it's useful to look at what is the cost of healthcare that is not covered. What I'm saying there is that if you look at the percentage of people who are covered by the Oregon Healthcare Plan, which is, and the cost of people, the cost to the state of funding public school teachers and other public employees, and you look at the percentage of Oregonians who are covered by Medicare, what you end up with are estimates of between 6 and 8.8% of Oregonians that are not covered by Medicare. So the percentage of uncovered Oregonians may be less than what you anticipated that it could be. Another question that people ask, or probably should ask, is, so how is this going to be done? And the legislature who presented this this ballot measure does not has not defined how they're going to do this. So what we're doing by voting on this is we're basically putting this in the Constitution so that it becomes a right, and then saying to the legislature, okay, this is a right, now figure it out. So this is the way the process is going to work for ballot measure 11. Ballot measure 12 is in many senses a simpler thing. It is it comes to the state. Well, let me put it this way. We have in our Constitution, our state Constitution, language that allows slavery and involuntary servitude as a punishment for a crime. We are not alone in having that in our state Constitution. It is in the U.S. Constitution, as well as in the state constitutions from 18 other states. The origin of this language is what's known as the slavery loophole language. So between the 1850s and the 1890s, formerly slave owning states were interested in having some form of slavery back in place. And so what they did was to create laws that said basically that if a former slave was convicted of a crime, which could be vagrancy, which could be really minor things like loitering, they then could be they could then be allowed to be punished by becoming slaves again. Now, this is obviously not a position that is held by many people nowadays, and this was made obvious to a group of Willamette University students who were working as interns with the legislature. And what they decided to do was to find a way of getting this language removed from the state constitution. And they did so by proposing legislation to the legislature in 2019 and also in 2021. 2021, they had the support of Jeff Merkley. And so because this is in the state constitution, it needs to be brought to the people to amend the constitution. And so that's the origin of this ballot measure. Now, the supporters of removing the language say that we must rid the Oregon Constitution of the language of slavery. It's out of touch with our values, and the measure doesn't affect existing programs. What that means is that there are a number of programs that have alternatives to incarceration, such as education, counseling, treatment, or community service, and it does not affect those programs. Those programs can still exist. The opponents to this say that we must always be careful in amending the Constitution in terms of unanticipated consequences. And since this language is in the federal Constitution, there is no point in removing it from the state Constitution. And finally, there could be a loss in revenue from prison labor. So let's look at a couple of those things. The question of the presence of this language in the U.S. Constitution involves something called the Supremacy Clause, which means that the federal law is supreme over state law when the two conflict. Now, this does not affect state laws, so any state laws would not be challenged by the removal of this language. Now, I have to say for myself, I think it's unlikely that there would be any challenges that would go to the Supreme Court supporting slavery and involuntary servitude, but that's a potential issue. And a second one about prison wages. A 2017 survey showed that the Oregon wages ranged from 5 cents per hour to 47 cents per hour. And so to the extent that that slave wages would not be allowed, there could be a revenue cost, but that's impossible to calculate. So now, and this measure too comes from the Senate as Senate Joint Resolution 10, and there was overwhelming support for the resolution. Ballot measure 113 says that legislators with 10 unexcused absences from floor sessions are disqualified from holding the next term of office. So this again amends the Constitution. And I'll let you read the slide. So the background for this measure is that the legislation is passed with a 2/3 majority, and recently the Republican minority has walked out to prevent votes on legislation. It should be noted that in 2001, Democrats, who were then in the minority, did the same thing with concerns about redistricting. So this is sort of a nuclear option for the minority party, but an option. So what the legislation does is to give them the power to discipline members for, they have power to discipline members for disorderly conduct. And this measure says that the 10 unexcused absences will result from the legislator holding office in the next session. Now, what are the issues associated with this? One is that while the rules of the Senate and the House are voted on by each body at the beginning of each session, they have not defined what an unexcused absence is. And the process for determining if an absence is unexcused involves sending a request to either the Speaker of the House or the President of the Senate. And when that decision is made, there's not a formal requirement for an explanation of why the request was denied. So what do supporters say? Supporters say something has to be done since important legislation is being held hostage, and there needs to be a penalty for legislators who don't do their jobs. What does the opposition say? This is one of the few tools available to the minority party. The process puts too much power in the hands of the President of the Senate or the Speaker of the House. And again, because it's amending the Constitution, there's always the possibility of unanticipated consequences. So one question that a person might have is, if the problem is that the quorum is a 2/3 majority, why not change the quorum? Because most state legislatures require only a majority of the members for a quorum. And I listened to some comments from legislators about that. And basically they said that the quorum can be a challenging concept to explain to people. But if you say, if a person doesn't do their job, they shouldn't be able to remain in that job. Basically, if you don't do the work, then you're fired. This is a way of looking at what this ballot measure does. And in this particular case, there's support from a number of public sector unions, the Oregon Education Association, the Oregon League of Conservation, the OLCV, the ACLU, the Oregon AFL-CIO, a variety of organizations feel that this is support this ballot measure. Okay, and the next. This is ballot measure 114, Reduction of Gun Violence Act. It requires a permit to acquire firearms. Police maintain the permits and firearms database, criminally prohibits certain ammunition magazines. Now, this is not the ballot measure language. This is a very comprehensive ballot measure. It runs to 14 pages, and it seems like they have considered practically everything that they need to consider. But let me talk with you about what it is that this measure does. And so, to give you a context for this, the background is that there has been an increase of gun ownership since 2020, accompanied by a spike in overall gun violence, including homicide, violent crimes, attempted suicide, and unintentional death and injury. Specifically, 77% of Oregon's gun deaths since 2020 have been suicides, which is 23 percentage points higher than the national average. So what are the current restrictions? There is no permit required to obtain a gun, nor registration, nor a permit for open carry. There is a permit required for concealed carry. Background checks are required for gun transfers. There's a red flag law, which allows the removal of firearms from those who pose a risk to themselves or others. There's a removal of, there is a provision for removal of firearms from dating partners in domestic abuse cases. There's a requirement for self-storage of firearms. There's an ability of certain jurisdictions to ban firearms, like colleges and universities. What this looks at, what this is requiring is a permit to purchase. And so that you must have that permit to obtain a firearm from a gun dealer, an individual, a gun show, and the language in the ballot measure says that a permit will be issued within 30 days if the requirements on the slide have been met. So there are situations where, in some places, where if you don't have a permit in if there's a 3-day window, and if the permit is not given within that time, then you're able to obtain a firearm. I don't know whether that is also true here for the situations where there are permits required. Anyway, so there's now a 30-day window. The permit agent is the police chief or the county sheriff. To get a permit, you need to pay $65, have a photo ID, a fingerprint, a criminal background check, and no history of medical or domestic violence. The federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies will be informed if a permit is sought by someone who fails the background check. The permit doesn't limit the number of firearms a holder may purchase or acquire. So that's the permit to purchase. The second requirement is that the purchaser must complete, the person who wants to purchase must complete an approved safety course, which includes firearms laws, safe firearm storage, and accident prevention, and a hands-on demonstration of basic firearms when handling and firing. This permit must be shown when purchasing. It may be denied if an applicant is a danger to oneself or others. And the third aspect of this is that magazines over 10 rounds or readily modified to exceed 10 rounds would be prohibited, with some exceptions for current owners, inheritors, law enforcement, and armed services personnel. So what are those exceptions? The exceptions are that the magazine is restricted to the owner's sole use, and its use on personal property, at shooting ranges, at competitions, and lawful recreational activities like hunting. And this is provided that the magazine is transported to such locations in a locked container, which is separate from any firearm. And the penalty for this is that it's at the misdemeanor level. So what do supporters say? Supporters say that studies have shown that permits to purchase reduce firearm-related injuries and death, and studies have further shown that firearm ownership or access to firearms triples the risk of suicide and doubles the risk of homicide when compared to someone who does not have access. They say these are common sense requirements. And the restrictions on high-capacity magazines during the 10-year federal ban from 1994 to 2004, and the ban in over 9 states and the District of Columbia have been found to reduce the number of fatalities and injuries in shooting incidents. And opponents say that this erodes Second Amendment rights. They are concerned about the one-size-fits-all training, the subjective mental health review. They feel that the permitting process is cumbersome and that criminals will continue to get firearms illegally. They also are concerned that the greatest effect will be on low-income families because the cost of the permit will leave vulnerable populations unable to defend themselves when crime is skyrocketing. And police departments, some police departments and sheriff's offices have agreed that complying will be either extraordinarily expensive or impossible, and that they won't be offering training. As a comment on that last objection, they do have language in the ballot measure that said that the approved safety course could be offered by law enforcement, a community college, private or public institution or organization or firearms training school utilizing instructors certified by a law enforcement agency, or proof of completion of any law enforcement firearms training course or class that's offered for security guards, investigators, reserve law enforcement officers, or any other law enforcement officers. So who supports this? The support is by Lift Every Voice Oregon, which is a faith-based organization that's leading the campaign. The opposition is the NRA. And I should also mention that as of 2022, 14 states and Washington, D.C. have enacted permit to purchase laws that vary by type of license and firearm purchased. 9 states and Washington, D.C. have enacted laws banning magazines capable of holding a certain number of rounds. So those are the state ballot measures. And what I'm going to do now is move to the county and city ballot measures. So what I've done is to sort of organize these by location, and I'll present them by location so that you can decide when you are interested in, when your questions have been answered by certain location, by your location. So there's a Lane County ballot measure whose purpose is the investment in county parks, water access, and restoration of natural areas. There's one in Eugene, which is ballot measure 20333, whose purpose is to fund street repair and walking, biking, safety, and tree projects. In Springfield, there's a ballot measure 327, which renews the 5-year local option levy for jail and police services. And the Rainbow Water District, which serves areas in northern and western Springfield, has a ballot measure 331, which is the renewal of a 5-year fire protection local option levy. The Upper Mackenzie Rural Fire Protection District has submitted ballot measure 20334, which is a local option levy for fire and EMS operations. Coburg has ballot measure 20336, which is involves permission to accept a revised 2022 Coburg charter. And then there are a number of psilocybin ban measures in smaller cities around in the area. So let's start with the county measure. So again, I will let you read this. So I'll stop talking for a minute. So the county is the size of the state of Rhode Island and has a system of parks and natural areas that need help in terms of improvements, because they just have not received the funding that they need in the past. So this is what has been stated is that because of inadequate funding and staffing levels for Lane County's parks, there have been delays in repairs, upgrades, and replacement of crucial infrastructure, with an estimate of around $25 million in deferred maintenance. and the um, the position which resulted in the ballot measure was supported by an external consultant. The levy funds would be placed in this restricted special revenue fund, and it would be audited. It should be mentioned, okay, yeah, yes. And the arguments for a yes vote are that many people utilize the county parks because they're close. If we put off deferred maintenance, yet again, the price for making the parks usable will be even greater. The arguments for a no vote is that this is yet another tax, which is hard for folks on fixed incomes. We have so many more important problems we should be spending money on. So what is the increase? The estimated tax levy for this tax rate is 0.1 is 16 cents per $1,000 of assessed valuation. And that says that the median, looking at the median price of a home, assessed value of a home, shows that folks would pay an average of $35 per year for 5 years. So this is a new tax. It is not as large as some. But what I really wanted to show you with this slide was that the difference between the market value of your house and the assessed value of your house. So this slide comes from the Lane County Assessor Tax Information site, which you can Google, or you can copy the URL for this. You can look up your house. You can look up your neighbor's house. But what you see in this slide, and this is one of my neighbor's house, is that while the cost, the market value of their house is dramatically higher than it was in 2011, the assessed value only goes up a slight amount. So if you're worried that because house prices are so high now that your tax bill is going to be incredible, this shows that it should be only slightly higher. I believe it's 3% than it was last year. So keep that in mind as you listen to all the other levies that we're going to be talking about. So for the city of Eugene, this is a renewal of a levy in essence that funds street repair, as I said before. My notes. So there's since this is the fourth bond measure seeking funding for street repairs. At the time of the first vote in 2008, the estimated backlog to repair city streets was $280 million over 10 years. The passage of bond measures in 2008, in 2012, and 2017 has cut that backlog by more than half, with a current estimated cost to be about $86 million. And according to a recent pavement management report, about $15.4 million is needed per year over the next decade to return all streets to good condition and keep any additional streets from needing to be reconstructed. Once this is achieved, it's currently estimated that the annual street repair budget would be about $11 million. You can get more information about this bill by going to Better Eugene Springfield Transportation, or BEST, which has a website. And if you look under our work and bonds, there's a history of these sorts of projects. There's information about which streets are going to be covered in this project. It's a very complete set of documentation about what this is actually going to mean. The arguments for a yes vote are because the 2022 measure continues the same tax rate as previous measures. The rate a person pays in taxes does not increase. The previous street measures have cut the backlog of street repairs by over 50%. Now, the arguments against it are that even if the tax rate is no higher than it's been in the past, this is yet another tax which is hard for folks on a fixed income. We have so many more important problems that we should be spending tax money on. So that's the City of Eugene measure. There is a measure in Springfield and related areas. This one, this ballot measure, 227, renews the 5-year local option levy for jail and police services. And this is a renewal, which means that it isn't a new tax. And I'll let you spend a couple of minutes reading it. And so some background on this is that currently the levy funds services in 4 areas: police services, which means funding for 8 police officers, 5 dispatchers, 5 community service officers, and 2 records and communication specialists. For the jail, it provides 100% of the funding for the jail and its 19 employees. Municipal court, it funds 2 full-time employees and additional judge hours. For the city prosecutor, it gives additional funding to help with increased service demands. It has the support of the city council, and they did a survey of several hundred students and several hundred citizens, which also showed support for the measure. So what do supporters say? Police are doing a good job in reducing crime. And because the levy is the same as the previous rate, this is not a tax increase. And the arguments for a no vote are becoming familiar. This is yet another tax which is hard for folks on fixed incomes, even though it's not a tax increase. We have so many more important problems that we should be spending tax money on. The next measure that's related to Springfield involves the Rainbow Water District, which serves areas in northern and western Springfield, primarily in the Hayden Bridge area and west of Aspen Street, which aren't annexed into the city. And what this is again a levy renewal, so it's not a new tax. And what they're looking for is funding to for fire protection services. So Rainbow Water District doesn't have its own fire protection services. They contract with Eugene Springfield Fire for this service. And this renews the measure passed in 2017, which expires in 2024, and is required to continue providing the fire and emergency services. And the rate on this is the same as the previous levy, and it'll be $367 per year for an average home. Okay. So that is that. And then we go a little bit further afield to the Upper Mackenzie Rural Fire Protection District, the ballot measure 334, which is to fund is a renewal of the local option levy for fire and EMS services. Now, I was curious about this because I wondered what tax base the Upper Mackenzie Rural Fire Protection District had after the fire. And so here is the information that I found out. Because of lost property tax revenues, the state is providing funds to reimburse those lost property tax revenues. In 2022, $86,732 will go to the Upper Mackenzie Rural Fire Protection District for taxes, as well as $36,286 for their local option in 2022. This is part of a $23.2 million reimbursement to counties for lost tax revenues. The rate requested in the levy is the same as in 2017. And at that time, the estimated revenue was $77,300 for 2022. So in the ballot measure, the revenue for 2023 is $71,500, which is down from the pre-fire estimate for the previous years by about 8%. But the bottom line here is that this should generate enough money to cover operations as needed. Now, the city of Coburg ballot measure. And this is to repeal previous charters and to adopt a new charter. And the background on this is that their most current version of the charter was in 1992. There are positions that have changed. There are charter provisions that are outdated. This is just you know how documents are when you don't keep them up to date. And so finally, what they've decided to do at the encouragement of their city manager is to follow the League of Oregon Cities 2018 model charter and to modify their charter to reflect what's going on in Coburg, which means adding the city administrator as an officer, clarifying responsibilities, updating responsibilities, all of the nuts and bolts stuff that needs to happen in order to clean up the operation in Coburg. So I should mention that I listened to a couple of the city council meetings when they were discussing this, and I was very impressed with the professionalism of their city manager and of the members of the city council. Now, here's one of the interesting ones for me. There are psilocybin measures that are ban measures that are being requested for small cities. So I've given you the language for Dune City and the measures for Junction City and the measures for actually, I've got it. I will clean up my slide. Anyway, the bottom line is that the measures for Junction City, Dune City, and Cottage Grove are basically the same. And what they are asking is whether the city should prohibit the psilocybin-related businesses. And this is allowed under the ballot measure that was passed 2 years ago for the implementation of psilocybin treatment centers. Now, Coburg has a slightly different approach, which is a temporary ban on psilocybin service centers for 2 years. And so you can read that language. And why are they doing that? Why are they doing that now? And in 2020, Oregon became the first state in the nation to legalize the therapeutic and supervised use of psilocybin after 56% of voters approved ballot measure 109. And it's the psilocybin is the active hallucinogenic ingredient in what's commonly referred to as magic mushrooms. The measure allows cities and counties to opt out of the program if their constituents vote to do so, and several are hoping to do that. But what this does, it seems like a straightforward measure, but there are some issues associated with this, which if there are residents who are hoping to be involved in psilocybin treatment centers, if they're considering training to become facilities, they may spend thousands of dollars for training, and they need clarity about whether their county or their city opts out. So to give an idea of the magnitude of the ban movement, as of September 2nd in 2022, the following counties had added permanent or temporary bans to the November ballot. So Clackamas, Umatilla, Jackson, Crook, unincorporated Deschutes, unincorporated Coos County, Klamath, unincorporated Clatsop County, and unincorporated Morrow County and unincorporated Douglas County. And then city bans include Brownsville, Philomath, Eagle Point, Central Point, Shady Cove, Phoenix, Rogue River, Banks, Cornelius, St. Helens, Newburgh, McMinnville, Lapine, Estacia, Sandy, Molalla, Brandon, Coos Bay, Coquille, Lakeside, Myrtle Point, North Bend, Culver, Madras, Metolius, Seaside, Oregon, Boardville, Heppner, Ione, Winston, Canyonville, Oakland, Glendale, Drain, Myrtle Creek, Reedsport, Sutherland, Riddle, Elkton, and Roseburg. Their vote is for allowing psilocybin and psilocin and Prineville. So this is on the ballot in a lot of places, and I should also apologize since I have only been here since 2015. I haven't gone to all the cities that I mentioned. So when I mispronounce their name, I apologize. And that then is the end of my presentation. Remember that you can get additional information, a voter's guide, by going to the League of Women Voters Oregon website, information from vote411.org, and information on the League of Women Voters Lane County website for candidate information. And I thank you for your attention.